You're just a little delayed, but I think we're good.
What's up, football fans? Welcome back to Sports Krunch with Dkrom. I'm your host, David Cromlow, but more commonly known as Dkrom to my colleagues in the sports media world. And today is an exciting day because today the first two teams of the National Football League have reported to training camp, and all the others will follow suit by the end of next week. So we are full speed ahead to the home stretch, counting down to the 2015 NFL season. And today, we are going to preview arguably what could easily be the best division in the National Football League, especially given the fact that the 49ers have fallen off a cliff. And last year, this division sent three teams to the playoffs, and it looked like it was going to send all four at once, the AFC North. And joining us to discuss the AFC North today is my colleague from FirstStopFantasy.com, Ashley Anderson. Good to have you back on the program, Ashley.
I'm excited to be back, David. I always love working with you.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure working with an amazing football mind like you. And we are going to start off by discussing last year's AFC North Division champion Pittsburgh Steelers. And let me get their draft class up on the screen for our viewers to see. Right there, as you see it, you should see it on your screen right now.
Yes,
yep,
sir.
and as you can see in this, the Steelers. Offense is not an issue for them at all, and we'll get into their amazing offense in just a little bit. Defense is the issue, and finally, after all these years, they're doing a long overdue youth movement on the defensive side of the football, and it should have been done years ago because yes, Troy Polamalu, future Hall of Famer, retired, and Ike Taylor retired at corner, and Brett Kiesel is no more there. So, and the only leftover is James Harrison, who is pretty much in an advisory role as a mentor. So it's finally happening. The Steelers have gotten completely young on defense again. They should have done it years ago, but But this could be the unit that's holding them back from taking that next step to going to and winning another Super Bowl. And as you see, they used the draft to primarily address their defense. In the first round, they selected the guy with arguably the biggest upside out of a deep pass rushing class is Bud Dupree from Kentucky. In the second round, they drafted Senquez Golson, a former Boston Red Sox prospect, actually, who led the SEC in interceptions last year with 10 out of Mississippi. And they drafted Duran Grant in the fourth round out of Ohio State. And they also, speaking of getting younger, they did re-sign Cam Hayward, their first-round draft pick in 2011, to a pretty lucrative deal a couple weeks ago. And Cam is turning out to be one of the better five-technique 3-4 defensive ends in football. And also you got Ryan Shazier, who showed freakish promise as a rookie before getting hurt last year. So you have all these young pieces on defense in Shazier, Golson, Hayward, and Dupree. And out of those four, which one do the Steelers need to step up the most if their defense is to make the strides that they need to get to the Super Bowl this year?
Well, I think arguably Shazier is going to be the most important guy for that team. I mean, he's in the middle. He's going to be heavily involved in reading offenses, trying to keep the defense on track. He proved himself as a rookie, so he doesn't really need to necessarily step up or break out in any way, but he is going to need to be a leader for that defense. As far as Bud Dupree and Senquez Golson go, I think that they might make it onto the field immediately, or they might be in there on a rotational basis. For every rookie, there is a learning curve, and so it's going to be important for them to quickly accelerate through that curve. Obviously, the Steelers are counting on both of them to be immediately available if called upon. I don't know that they will be, starters week one, but I can see them being there in later weeks. I can definitely see them having an impact on a rotational basis pretty early on. But as for every rookie, like I said, there is that learning curve. And Golson especially, there are some questions about his size. He's only 5'8". Can he keep up with the bigger receivers in this league? He's a pure corner. You saw that he had a lot of turnovers, a lot of interceptions. But is he going to be able to do that on a pro level? Can that translate when you're going up against a 6'5" receiver? Kind of remains to be seen. The one I would not overlook is Shamarko Thomas. You didn't mention him, but he's going to be stepping into a huge role this year with Troy Polamalu leaving. And I think he's definitely one that you have to watch out for. Is he going to be able to make the leap to be a full-time starter? Can he solidify the defensive backs and keep everyone on the same page there, especially if he is working with younger corners?
Yeah, so that corner issue is arguably the biggest position issue the Steelers have right now, and we'll get to that a little bit later. And I continue with their draft for a moment. In the third round, they selected yet another wide receiver and adding to their already amazing wide receiver depth in Sammy Coates out of Auburn. Coates at 6'1", 212, and he exploded against Alabama out of all teams last year for 206 receiving yards in that game alone last year. So he definitely has promise, but his hands are just god awful right now, god awful. And but given who they already have, yes, obviously Antonio Brown, one of the three best wide receivers of the league in my opinion. Martavis Bryant, who exploded last year. We'll get to him more in a little bit. And Marcus Wheaton, who still has disappointed to a certain degree, in my opinion. But my question is, does this Sammy Coates selection put more pressure on Wheaton or Martavis Bryant?
Oh, well, definitely Wheaton. Like you said, he has disappointed thus far. He was expected to make the leap last year, didn't do it. Bryant had 8 touchdowns, Wheaton had 2. You can see that there's a huge disparity between the two, and I think arguably Wheaton is the one that's going to be most impacted by this selection. He's going to have to really watch his back. His position might be at risk if Coates can improve on the hands.
Most definitely. And continuing on with that receiving core, I mentioned Martavis Bryant. And Martavis Bryant was a prospect that personally intrigued me when he was selected in 2014 because playing at Clemson, he was obviously lost in the shadow of his more well-known teammate Sammy Watkins, but he jumped out on the tape and made a lot of jaw-dropping plays to me. And scouts said that if he just got more consistent with his route running and his hands, he could be a stud in this league. And apparently the Steelers are expecting him to take the next step after a, dare I say, monstrous rookie year. And do you think Martavis Bryant makes that next step? And if he does, how difficult is this Steelers receiving core going to be to cover?
Well, he's obviously learning from one of the best in Antonio Bryant. He showed that he can make an impact in the red zone with the receiving touchdowns last season. He's going to be counted on, I would think, to be the number 2 guy right off the bat. And I would imagine that would obviously present him with more opportunities. If I'm correct, he only had 26 catches last year, but 8 of them were for touchdowns. So given more opportunities, I think you're going to see him be a really difficult guy for any unit to cover.
Yes, sir. And he's also the biggest receiver that the Steelers have at 6. Hey, God, sorry, I'm reading something. At 6'4", 211, 6'4", 211. So that's why he's arguably looked at as the numero uno target when they go to the red zone. And
absolutely,
that's a name that all you fantasy geeks have to keep an eye on in the mid to late rounds of your drafts. And but continue with the Steelers offense. There's no debate about it. The straw that stirs that drink is Le'Veon Bell. And Le'Veon Bell last year proved he's at least one of the 2 or 3 best running backs in the NFL. He could do it all. He could run. He could catch the ball. He could pass protect. He might not have any exotic moves, but he is so intelligent. And once he hits that hole, bam! God, he's so special. But as most of you know, even though it's currently under appeal, he is currently suspended for the first 3 games of the regular season based on that marijuana citation he got with LeGarrette Blount last off season. And let's look at the Steelers' first 3 games on their schedule. They open up obviously at the Patriots on the road, and then San Francisco at home, and that game should be easy. And St. Louis on the road, and that game is definitely not going to be easy based on how tough the Rams have played everybody pretty much these past couple years. So my question is, how do you think the Steelers fare in those first 3 games without Le'Veon Bell? What do you see their record being after those first 3 games? And who do you think the Steelers need to step up the most on offense, not named D'Angelo Williams in his absence?
Well, I actually think that they will go 2-1 despite not having Le'Veon Bell. Like you said, the 49ers game, it shouldn't be too much of a challenge for them to win that game. I think going on the road to New England, you're playing against the defending champs. As much as I don't like Tom Brady, and I'll admit that, I think he's going to end up playing in Week 1, whether it's because they drop his suspension or because he takes this thing to court. But I think he is going to be under center for the Pats in Week 1, and that's going to be a really, really tough challenge for this young Steelers defense. And that right there I see as a loss. Week 3 is the intriguing matchup. Like you were saying, St. Louis has played everybody tough. It doesn't always work out in the win-loss column for them, but they do present a challenge every time you go against them. But I do see the Steelers being victorious there. They still have Big Ben. They will punish you through the air. I think that it would have been a tough task for Bell to even get going on the ground against the St. Louis front. So I think more than likely they were going to game plan for more aerial attack in that matchup anyway. And just considering, like we were talking about, Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant, you've got those two guys are going to take the tops off of defenses. And Big Ben with his arm, I don't doubt that he can do that, everything he needs to do without Le'Veon Bell in the backfield. Like you mentioned briefly, D'Angelo Williams, he's going to definitely need to step up. But in terms of other guys that need to step up, I think just your receiving core, because they're going to be called upon early and often, and Ben's going to be using his arm like crazy.
You know it, but the concern I have is that playoff game last season, the wild card playoff game against the Baltimore Ravens, which the Steelers obviously lost because Bell couldn't play in that game due to injury. The absence of him exposed that offense because he's and that proved that he's, like I said, the linchpin. But they're going up against at least two of those teams are going up against the Patriots. And the Rams have stout defensive fronts, and that is my biggest concern. That if they get to be too one-dimensional, that they could go 1-2 in those games. But I agree that they're going to go 2-1. But I still have my concerns. But now let's move on. Back to the defensive side of the ball.
If they wanted to.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Since you're a Ravens fan, you prefer that I be right there. So
Yeah.
We'll get to that in a little bit. But the Steelers also on the defensive side of the ball, they made a move symbolizing, and I think this move symbolizes the most why this is a unit in transition. They got rid of Hall of Famer Dick LeBeau, arguably the ageless wonder of the National Football League, still coaching, and he's almost 80. He's going to be with the Titans this year. But they parted ways after a long, long tenure with LeBeau, and they replaced him with linebackers coach Keith Butler, who's going to be their defensive coordinator. And my question is, do you think that was a smart move to part ways with LeBeau?
Yeah, I think it was. I think any coach that's in their position for a very long time, it gets to be a little stale. Obviously, he is one of the best defensive coordinators that there has ever been. And it's incredible to see a guy his age still coaching, still doing what he's doing. But I do think it's good to make a change, especially considering now that the youth movement on that defense, getting a younger coach, he has been with the team, so he's not completely unfamiliar. He worked under LeBeau, so he's got that experience. But I think that he'll help give a change of pace to a defense that has needed it for a while now. They've needed an injection of youth. They've needed some spark. And you can't change all your players, get new, younger players, and keep your 80-year-old head or defensive coordinator. It's just, I think the message would be lost on some of those younger guys when you're talking about grandpa coaching them. I just think it's probably good to, if you're going to do it all, do it at once. Do it all at once. And they may have a little bit of growing pains this season, but it's the time to do it.
I completely agree, and the fact that some in the media have questioned that decision just boggles my mind personally, because it was long overdue for that to happen, as I alluded to at the beginning of the program. And returning back to that Pittsburgh secondary for a second, because that's where you're going to see all these position battles. Like you mentioned, you don't expect to see Sedquez Golson start off week 1. I agree. He's going to be the nickel corner to start the season, especially given his size and the big receivers he's going to have to cover throughout the season. And you mentioned Shamarko Thomas and Mike Mitchell, but I think their biggest concern is at corner rather than safety, because Troy Polamalu was clearly like the Tin Man these past couple seasons, if you know what I mean. So Shamarko Thomas is definitely an upgrade over the Troy Polamalu the last 2 seasons. But it's the corner position that strikes me, especially having to play against the Patriots in week 1, and those loads of weapons with Gronk and Edelman and Amendola and LaFell. That's going to be a difficult test, as you said. And their 2 starting corners last season, William Gay and Cortez Allen, basically I think Tomlin, there was a time in the season where Tomlin benched both of them because they were playing so poorly. And they also added another corner in the draft in the 4th round in Duran Grant out of Ohio State. And having played on a national championship team, I think he brings an ultra-competitive winning pedigree to that secondary. And also they got I can't recall what other corner additions they made in the offseason, but do you think Duran Grant has a chance to supplant either Gay or Cortez Allen in the starting lineup in week 1?
Not week 1. I mean, I really think that defensive backs have almost the hardest route to a starting role as a rookie. It's so much communication to learn. It's difficult for any rookie, let alone a 4th-round pick, to make that kind of leap. There's high expectations. I think that eventually they're both, Cortez Allen and William Gay will both be on the bench, but I don't think that's going to happen immediately. It's too much for these young guys to take in and try to put together that quickly.
Yes, sir, and or yes, ma'am. I got to be politically correct on the show, and yes, ma'am, and I definitely agree. And Mike Tomlin is not a guy who likes to throw mid-round rookies into the fire early on, so he's going to have some growing up to do. But it could happen by mid-season, especially because they're dealing with spare parts at that cornerback position, and that, I believe, is the position that could hold them back from contending for a Super Bowl. And now moving on to the Baltimore Ravens, who, in my opinion, are the team best equipped to dethrone the New England Patriots in the AFC this season, and I'll explain why later. But I think the biggest reason why is they have Ozzie Newsome as their general manager. Ozzie Newsome is easily Bill Belichick's most gifted disciple, not named Nick Saban, and I think he's even better than Nick Saban. I'd much rather have dinner with Ozzie than Nick, because Saban tends to be a jerk, and Ozzie is known as being a friendly guy. And if there's anybody who knows Bill Belichick better in the NFL, it is Ozzie Newsome. He builds his teams to beat the Patriots. He knows how to build rosters in the exact same way that Bill Belichick does, if not better. And his yet another amazing draft haul by him confirmed it, as we put up the Ravens 2014 draft class on the screen. There you have it. And like I said, year after year, Ozzie Newsome just hits single after single after double in the draft, and it all results in a grand slam by the end of the day a lot of the time. And this year was no different. And this year was paid attention to the offensive side of the ball, losing Torrey Smith, losing Owen Daniels, Dennis Pitta's plague future itself up in the air. You had to get Joe Flacco more mouths to feed, and that's exactly what he did in the 1st round, selecting one of the most intriguing prospects in the draft, Rashad Perriman, wide receiver out of Central Florida, the son of former Lions and Saints wideout Brett Perriman. I remember watching Brett play when I was a little boy, so the bloodlines are definitely there. And Max Williams in round 2, trading up right in front of the Steelers to nab him, and the Steelers reportedly would have nabbed Williams at 56 had the Ravens not traded up. Williams, clearly the best tight end draft in this draft out of a very poor tight end draft class, and many people I spoke to say he reminds them of future Hall of Fame tight end Jason Witten. So those are 2 intriguing weapons for Joe Flacco right off the bat. However, they are still rookies, and Brashad Perriman was still struggling with his drops in OTAs. And Max Williams said that the playbook under Mark Trestman, who we'll discuss in just a second, is a million times more complicated than the playbook he ran at Minnesota, which was more of a spread option scheme. So my question is, it's a two-part question. What are your expectations for Perriman and Max Williams this season, and who will the Ravens be counting on, whose name is not Steve Smith, to deliver if Perriman and Williams struggle to grow up fast?
Well, my expectation for Perriman is that he is going to eventually be a starter. I actually would say he's not a week one starter. Some people would disagree with me. Actually, I think a lot of people would disagree with me because he is a first-round pick. There's high expectations, but I just don't see it. Max Williams, however, I think will end up being a starter. I just think that we needed an injection there of youth and receiving. We do have a couple of blocking tight ends on our roster, Crockett Gilmore. We drafted Nick Boyle in the 5th round. So we have the blockers, but as far as receiving tight ends in the mold of Dennis Pitta, Max Williams is the guy that we're counting on to take that spot. And if you watch tapes in years past, Joe Flacco loved throwing to Dennis Pitta. That was his security blanket. He knew he could count on Pitta. And if Williams gets to take over that role, I think he could be an Offensive Rookie of the Year. I think the potential's there. I think he's a week one starter. He's got the bloodlines. He's obviously, he's got a lot to learn, but he's going to get fed the ball early and often by Joe Flacco. And so that's the first part. But if the two of them both struggle, I think the Ravens are still okay. I think that in the receiving core you have Kamar Aiken, you have Marlon Brown, and then tight end Crockett Gilmore. Known more as a blocker, but he can catch the ball. He showed that a little bit last year. He's got good hands. He gets open. Maybe not the first thing he likes to do. He likes to be a blocker. He likes to open up holes in the run game, but he can do it if he's called upon. Marlon Brown dropped off a little bit last year with the addition of Steve Smith, but had an explosive rookie year, similar to Martavis Bryant's year last year in Pittsburgh. Caught a lot of touchdowns. He's a big guy, huge red zone target, more in the mold of a tight end, but he's got a little more speed than your average tight end. So he's going to be a big red zone target, whether Perriman's on the field or not. I think they're going to get the ball to Marlon Brown a lot more this year. And Kamar Aiken was a really pleasant surprise last year for the Ravens. Kind of came out of nowhere, had spent some years bouncing around on practice squads. I'm pretty sure he was out of practice squad eligibility, so if he hadn't made the Ravens active roster, that would have been it for him. But you know what? They signed him on. I think there were 7 receivers at the start of the year, and he made the most of it. When he had opportunities, he was catching everything thrown at him. So I have a feeling that Aiken and Brown are going to be the 2 and 3 receivers this year to start, giving Perriman a little bit of a chance to better his hands, get a little more comfortable with the pro system, and then Perriman will come in next season when Steve Smith more than likely retires.
Yes, and another name that has been being buzzed about a lot by the Ravens beat writers at OTAs is this guy, Jeremy Butler. In case I get that name wrong, you correct me, but explain.
You got it.
Yeah, Jeremy Butler. Explain what he brings to the table and his background for us, please.
Well, Butler's a guy that is really intriguing. He got hurt last year. Before that, he looked like someone that could potentially make the active roster. In fact, he probably would have had Aiken's spot on the active roster last year had he not gotten injured. I think he'll win a spot this year. There's just so many good receivers in Baltimore that I always kind of laugh when people talk about how we were hurting at receiver without Torrey Smith. I mean, even without the addition of Perriman, we had a plethora of young, talented guys. Butler's going to be fighting for touches as a receiver. I think he could break into the return game a little bit, though. The Ravens let go of Jacoby Jones. They don't know who is going to be returning kicks for them right now. Lardarius Webb wants to do it, but the guy has health issues, and they need him to be healthy at corner. So one of these receivers might end up making his niche in the return game. And Butler's one of those guys that they're looking at, I think, for that. And he should get reps on the offense, but I think his major contribution could be where Jacoby Jones was last year, helping in the return game where we don't know exactly who's going to end up there right now.
That will be another interesting training camp panel to watch in the return game. And, yes, and like you mentioned about the Ravens wide receivers, that only adds to my point why Ozzie Newsome governs his team in a very similar way to Bill Belichick, because he's able to get these undrafted free agent wide receivers and which are viewed as trash by all 31 other teams, and he turns them into treasures, just like Bill Belichick and Tom Brady have done in New England, and Ozzie Newsome and Joe Flacco have been doing the exact same thing with the Ravens in years past. And that's another reason why I think the Ravens are the best equipped team to dethrone the Patriots. And we'll explain more about that a little later. But there were several your next 3 draft picks. The Ravens' next 3 draft picks also opened my eyes in a very good way. They drafted in the 3rd round a guy who many saw it going in the 1st, Carl Davis, a defensive tackle from Iowa. And a friend of mine said that if he just didn't make that comment about, I want to be part of a rotation, if he didn't make that comment, he could have been a 1st-round pick, because he suspected that comment set his draft stock tumbling. But Carl Davis gives you a much-needed extra body at the 5 technique, where you're trying to replace Haloti Ngata, who you traded away to clear cap space. And I believe that's going to be a very good move for you in the long run. But and you also got Timmy Jernigan, who the Ravens are expecting big things out of this year at 5 technique. And Courtney Upshaw, though, is headed into a contract year. And based on what I read, it's unlikely that they keep him, because he's a bit of a one-trick pony, not a pass rusher, just an edge center in the run game. But so the question is, with Courtney Upshaw, this likely be his last year with the Ravens. Do you think Carl Davis sees a healthy amount of time in the rotation? And if so, how much play time does he get this season?
Well, the Ravens love to mix things up along the defensive line. They shuffle people in and out based on their packages, based on if they're defending against the run or the pass. I think everybody along the defensive line is going to get a healthy amount of playing time because right now, Brandon Williams looks to be the main guy, the stalwart to replace Haloti Ngata. But like you mentioned, Timmy Jernigan, Carl Davis, there is so much depth at those positions. There's a couple of guys coming back from injury this year who could make a huge impact on the defensive line. And that's one of the strengths, I think, of the Ravens, is that they have so many guys, interchangeable pieces, that they can just plug in and out and keep people fresh. And they keep the pass rush alive by just shuffling. They are so good against the run, 26 straight games without allowing a 100-yard rusher. It's because they are so good at interchanging people and keeping people fresh. They're not worn down by the end of a game because they're playing every single snap. They're coming in and out every 2 or 3 plays to get a breather, get a drink, and really being able to, and one of the strengths is the coaches can see where each player excels, and they're putting them into those specific packages. So it's just beautiful. You can just see it's a masterpiece of talent and ability coming together with these plays, and that's why I think Carl Davis should see a lot of snaps this year, as with everyone else on the defensive line, really.
But most certainly, and you mentioned Brandon Williams. I thought Brandon actually started most of the games at nose tackle last year, and Haloti was an end, and so Brandon Williams is theoretically the person that is not replacing Haloti. It's going to be Jernigan and a mixture of those other guys. I just want to make sure if you're right or I'm right. Did Brandon start at the nose?
If I remember right, it was a mix, because when Ngata was suspended, I'm fairly certain Williams was starting in his spot. Jernigan played quite a bit during that time. So during those 4 games that Ngata was suspended, the 2 of them pretty much rotated in and out of that spot and kind of paired up, I think, to replace Ngata at that point, which I think is pretty much what's going to happen this year. It's going to be a healthy mixture at every spot, really.
Totally. But you think Brandon is the nose tackle this year, correct?
Definitely, yeah.
Yes, and I believe he'll this is his breakout year. He could grow into one of the most feared 3-4 nose tackles in the game, based on the tape I saw of him last year when Nada was suspended, as you alluded to. And in the 4th round, yes, you have Terrell Suggs and Elvis Dumervil, one of the best pass rushing tabs in the NFL. But for every 2 pass rushers, you need 3. You can't have enough. And you lost Pernell McPhee in free agency, and McPhee was a very underrated part of that pass rush last year. And you arguably got who many scouts think is a clone of Pernell McPhee in the 4th round at pick 122 overall in Zadarius Smith, who played opposite of Bud Dupree at Kentucky. Do you think Zadarius Smith jumps into that Pernell McPhee role right away, or if not, who does to start the season?
I think he definitely has the potential to jump right into that role. Upshaw's name has been mentioned as possibly moving more into a role of McPhee. You mentioned that he's not the best pass rusher, so that may not be the best fit for him. And that would definitely open up that role for Zadarius Smith, who, like you said, many people think is basically a clone of Pernell McPhee. If he can get everything together mentally, I think physically he is set for that position. And it's just, I mean, it's amazing how when one goes, another one comes in, and immediately it's just like perfect, a perfect fit. It's a puzzle, and somehow the Ravens just got so lucky to be able to plug somebody in that basically fits exactly what they were looking for.
Yep, and that's a testament to Ozzie Newsome and his scouting staff there, and the unbelievable job they do year in and year out. Just amazes me every single season. And in the 5th round, you picked a running back from USC, the Ravens did, in Javorius Allen, but more commonly known as Buck Allen, 6 foot, 221 pounds. And he is that typical Mark Trestman running back in the mold of Matt Forte, who could run, catch the ball out of the backfield especially, and pass protect. And my question is, do you think they use Allen a lot this year do they use Allen a lot this year to spell Justin Forsett? And if so, how much? Or do you see Forsett maintaining the role as the workhorse?
Well, I think Forsett is arguably the top guy. He just got a new contract. He's finally found a foothold in Baltimore. I think he is quite capable of catching the ball out of the backfield, and so I believe he's going to hang on to that role. I think he's going to be a 3-down back. I think if they do spell him, it's probably going to be with last year's pick, Lorenzo Taliaferro, especially down toward the goal line. Taliaferro is a bigger, bruising back. He's going to be getting those goal line short yardage carries. I think Allen will probably be mixed in every now and then as a change of pace kind of guy. It would be interesting to see if they would ever use the 2 of them at one time, Forsett and Allen, in maybe an I formation type kind of, interesting, mix it up a little bit formation. I think that there's going to be a lot of new wrinkles with the Ravens offense this year, and it should be fun to see if they would ever do something along those lines. But I think for the most part, Forsett is going to be the guy. They paid him like he's the guy. And they loved what he did last year. He finally had a breakout year, ended up in the Pro Bowl, and he's going to work his tail off. He does not want to lose his job. He doesn't want to lose touches to anybody after finally finding a niche in Baltimore.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I expect the same thing because especially if you look at Mark Trestman's track record with running backs, Charlie Garner when he was the offensive coordinator for the Raiders the last time they made the playoffs, and obviously with Matt Forte these past a couple seasons in Chicago. And let's get to Mark Trestman. Last season, Gary Kubiak, now the head coach of the Denver Broncos, was the offensive coordinator with the Ravens, and he and Rick Dennison did a fabulous job of helping Joe Flacco solidify his status as a top 10 quarterback in the National Football League. And any of you out there who do not think Joe Flacco is worthy of that status, I am very sorry, you are dead wrong. I like him better than Russell Wilson, for the record. And based on how he played in those playoff games last year, just shows you why that 2012 Super Bowl run was no joke, folks. And but Gary Kubiak, because he did such a great job with Flacco, and his dream job at Denver opened up, and he decided he couldn't say no to return to his old stomping grounds to be the head coach of the Broncos, and he replaced him with the acclaimed quarterback whisperer Mark Trestman. And at first, you weren't the biggest fan of this hire, and I understand why, given the fact of that disaster last season with the Bears. That yes, you could talk about Jay Cutler stinging up the joint all you want and him being uncoachable, but his play calling was very questionable last year. The fact that he wasn't able to exploit weaknesses in opposing defenses, and not like for example, when they played the Packers in like Week 11 and they had a poor run defense, he like shied away from the run from the get-go. He looked utterly clueless at times. And but coming back to the question, what are your current thoughts about Trestman? Have you gotten more accepting of his hiring as offensive coordinator? And also, do you think Ravens fans should at least be comfortable that Ozzie Newsome and John Harbaugh will be in his ear a lot about running the ball more often?
Well, the more I have read about Trestman, the more I've grown to like him. It's going to be interesting. Joe Flacco is so used to this. He has had one after another offensive coordinator, and he is just so used to this change. And the nice thing about Joe is that he just doesn't care. He just takes it all in stride. It doesn't matter to him who's calling the plays. He's just going to go out there, work, do his thing. As far as the play calling goes, the Ravens are a run-first team. They've made that very clear. And when Trestman was hired, I am sure that both Harbaugh and Newsome said to him, we are a run-first team. We play in the AFC North. It's ground and pound football. We don't try to play this finesse game where we go through the air all the time. We want to run the ball and stop the run on defense, and that's the mold of the Ravens. And I think Trestman would not have interviewed for that job or felt comfortable being in that role if he wasn't willing to assimilate to that culture a little bit. That's been the way of the Ravens since they became a franchise. And so I think that Trestman is going to adjust his playbook. I think that he is very well aware of what worked in Baltimore last year. Got a career year out of Justin Forsett and Joe Flacco. And I think that Trestman is going to just add his little wrinkles here and there to the offense. But for the most part, they're going to go with what worked. You know, you don't get those kind of results out of guys 7 or 8 years in their career if you're not doing something right. And so I think Trestman is aware of the fact that he can't change too much. He's not going to come in there and completely overhaul a system that worked very well for the Ravens last year. So I do think Ravens fans should take a deep breath. I was very upset at first, but I think now we should all feel a little more comfortable. Trestman has come right out and said that he's going to do things the Raven way, so we're all right.
I believe you are too. And like I said, yes, his play calling was iffy last year, but he was working with an uncoachable quarterback. And I kind of contradicting what I said earlier. Trestman, the reason why I think he failed in Chicago, he's just not meant. He was never meant to be a head coach at the NFL. But it was as an offensive coordinator was where he made his money and his rent in the NFL. Just ask Steve Young or Rich Gannon or Jake Plummer or all those guys who played for him. He knows how to maximize quarterbacks. And heck, he made Josh McCown into a superstar with the Bears. And Jimmy Clausen looked very good in his lone start with the Bears last year. So I think the Ravens got a terrific hire at the end of the day. But his cluelessness kind of gets in the way at times, but it shouldn't be an issue. And you mentioned him doing things the Raven way. He said on day one he would keep the zone blocking system that Gary Kubiak and Rick Dennison brought to you guys last season, and especially given I'd say the Ravens have the second best offensive line in football, only to the Cowboys. So given what you have, just don't ask them to do something else. Keep the Kubiak playbook in, and Trestman did the smart thing there, and I think that's why the Ravens have nothing to fear with Mark Trestman as the offensive coordinator in the long run. And we discussed this Ravens team in depth. And like I said, they're the team best equipped, in my opinion, to dethrone the Patriots and go to the Super Bowl. But if there's one thing holding them back, it is the secondary. And last year, Jimmy Smith getting hurt with that Liz Frank injury, it fell off a cliff. And as was exposed in that playoff loss against the Patriots, where they surrendered 2 double-digit leads. The question is, who are they counting on the most in the secondary this year? And what are the positions battles in the secondary to watch during training camp?
Well, I think they're definitely counting on Jimmy Smith. He has got to stay healthy. When he's healthy, he's a shutdown corner. The Ravens had Chris McAllister in years past, so they're very familiar with shutdown corners that can get the job done, and that is why they drafted Jimmy Smith. And unfortunately, it hasn't all panned out for him. Seems like when he was finally getting on track, he got hurt. But in the games that he started, I think he only allowed like 121 yards through the air. So if he can stay healthy for all 16 games, he's really going to be the leader of that secondary. Obviously, Lardarius Webb banged up. You know, he played through injuries last year. They're definitely counting on him to stay healthy, but that's another huge question mark. He has been injury-prone throughout his career. But aside from those two guys who they're crossing their fingers can stay healthy, the Ravens brought in Kyle Arrington, who was a former Patriot. They're counting on him to provide depth in the secondary, probably play out of the slot in the nickel position there. I think he's going to be a big help in the secondary, especially with getting interceptions, helping the Ravens create turnovers. And Kendrick Lewis, I think, is going to be the guy that helps solidify our safety position, where last year Matt Elam definitely struggled. He lost that job pretty quickly. Will Hill and Matt Elam right now, that's the position battle to watch, I would say. Matt Elam was a first-round pick, and so the Ravens are really, really hoping he can step up. They're not very well known for draft busts, and they don't want to be known for this one. So they're hoping Elam can put it all together. Meanwhile, Will Hill came to us last season, if I'm correct, spent the first 6 games suspended. When he came back, he gave the secondary a major boost. And so I think that right now you're going to see Kendrick Lewis starting in one safety spot with Will Hill and Matt Elam competing for the other. And that's going to be the most intriguing battle because I think they'd like to give Elam the edge based on the fact that he's a first-round pick that was homegrown. We drafted him. But Hill is going to be a guy that's tough to beat for that spot just because he is such a hard-hitting safety and he really brings a veteran presence to the secondary. And so I think that's going to come right down to the wire as to which one of those two guys is going to win that spot.
I agree. That's the battle in Ravens camp that I'm looking forward to watching the most. And who do you think comes out on top in the end, Hill or Matt Elam?
Right now, I have to say Will Hill. He definitely had a better season when he was on the field last year. Elam still kind of has to prove himself. I think that, like the Ravens do at most positions, they're going to rotate in and out. Elam will hopefully get it all together, and next year should be a full-time starter if he can. But I definitely think out of camp and in the preseason, you're going to see Will Hill's going to win that battle.
I think you're right about that, but Matt Elam is definitely going to be playing with the chip on his shoulder all year long, and they're probably going to want to get him as many snaps as possible to justify their investment in him. And before we move on to the Bengals, one last question about the Ravens. Like I've said several times already for this broadcast, this is my team that I believe has the best chance at dethroning the Patriots to get to Super Bowl 50. Do you think the Ravens have made enough moves to take that next step after coming oh so close against the Patriots in the playoffs last year? And if so, why am I correct?
I absolutely agree. The biggest weakness that the Ravens had last season and the reason that they lost to the Patriots was because of the secondary. It was a disaster by that point in the season. You had Rashaan Melvin at one starting spot. You had a converted safety and Anthony Levine playing cornerback. I can't even tell you who else was playing in that game. It was literally guys off the scrap heap, guys off of practice squads. They had no business being in the secondary against the Patriots. But we've taken steps to improve there. We've brought in Kyle Arrington, brought in Kendrick Lewis. Will Hill should be starting from week 1 instead of week 7. Just solidified that position all around. We also drafted a cornerback who is going to eventually be pushing for some playing time. So we've definitely added depth in and solidified the secondary. And that being the biggest weakness last year, I think Ozzie Newsome has always said you can't have enough cornerbacks, and he has really taken that to heart this season, really bringing in guys from all over the place. And I think that with that and the depth that they're going to have, even if Jimmy Smith and Lardarius Webb are not available, I think that they have really done everything that they possibly can to ensure that that doesn't come back to bite them again like it did last season.
Yeah, I completely agree. And another reason I believe the Ravens are better equipped for the Patriots is that, yes, you could talk about Andrew Luck and the Colts offense all you want, but when it comes to the trenches, I just don't think they're built the way the Ravens and the Patriots are up front, and that's why I believe that those are going to be the final two teams left standing in the AFC by late January. And God, I could praise the Ravens all I want. But another question creeped up in my head about extracurricular. An extracurricular question, but it just popped up. I'm talking to you from Chicago, and obviously I'm surrounded by Bears fans, and the Bears made an intriguing hire by bringing in a Raven scout, Mark Douglas, I believe his name was, to be their director of college scouting. And if you know anything about him, what do you think the Bears are getting in him to run their college scouting department? And do you think he is going to bring a lot of the Ravens' influence to the Bears when it comes to the draft?
Well, you can see, just because of how successful the Ravens have been in years past, that they do have a really great scouting team. It's not often that a guy from that team actually makes a switch because they've always been so successful. They tend to maintain their core group of people in Baltimore that are going out scouting and just really keeping on top of things. But I think the Bears are very lucky to have made that hire, because they are going to get a little bit more of the insight that the Ravens have had for all these years. When you go to colleges and you're looking at pro days and you're looking at workouts and you're just trying to find out what guy is going to actually translate from what's on that paper to what's going to be on your field. The Ravens have always done such a great job of that, and now the Bears are going to be fortunate to have someone who brings that experience, who brings that keen eye for talent. And if he can get everybody on board and kind of give them a little bit of an idea of how the Ravens have done it in the past, I think that the Bears could really put together a solid draft in 2016. Kind of remains to be seen what's going to happen, who's going to emerge from the college world. But definitely, I think the Bears are very lucky to have had such a talented guy make the switch.
They most certainly are, and like I've told friends, I think that was the best offseason move the Bears made by getting Mark Douglas from the Ravens scouting department, and unless I'm mistaken, it was he that Ozzie Newsome valued his insight a lot, and it was he that convinced Ozzie Newsome to draft somebody named Joe Flacco out of Delaware in 2008. So the Bears got lucky by landing a fish from one of the best scouting departments of all time, I should say. And now moving on to arguably the most gifted disciple of Ozzie Newsome, Mr. Marvin Lewis and the Cincinnati Bengals. And like you told me last year, Marvin Lewis clearly learned a lot from Ozzie Newsome during his limited time in Baltimore, knowing how to build through the draft, assemble a top-notch scouting staff, and the Bengals drafts are like no two teams put together more solid drafts year in and year out in recent years than the Bengals and Ravens have, and this year was no different. And the Bengals clearly look to the future with their first two picks, as you can see on the screen, because keep in mind, they're two starting offensive tackles, and Andre Smith at right tackle and Andrew Whitworth at left tackle, and Whitworth is going to be 34 at the end of the season, by the way, are coming out of contract at the end of 2015, and they picked their heirs apparent in Cedric Ogbuehi out of Texas A&M, and one of my personal favorite offensive line prospects in this year's draft, Jake Fisher out of Oregon. And Ogbuehi is coming off a torn ACL, so it's pretty likely he's going to be asked to redshirt this season. But Fisher is interesting. And do you think, especially with Andre Smith not likely to be back with the Bengals next season, do you think they give some snaps to Jake Fisher? And if so, how much playing time do you think Jake Fisher will get, or Ogbuehi if he turns out to be healthier quicker than expected?
I think you'll see about a 70-30 split. It's always good to give rookies some snaps. Fisher is no exception. So, I definitely think he'll get on the field. Whitworth's an older guy, so maybe he gets to rotate in that role a little bit. If I'm not mistaken, Whitworth has come right out and said he was told this is his last year as a Bengal. I don't know if that will influence how hard he plays, or if that's gonna get in his head a little bit. And maybe leave a little bit of an opening there at the tackle position. I don't know how I'd feel if someone told me you're not going to have a job at the end of the season. I don't know if I'd really work quite as hard knowing that. But yeah, I think always it's good to get younger guys in there, especially when they are the ones that are going to be solidifying the line in the future. So if he does get healthy, I think he'll also get some snaps. But yeah, Fisher, I'd say it's probably going to be a 70-30 kind of split. I do think he'll see the field quite a bit just in in terms of trying to get him some rotations, get him there, knowing the offense a little bit better, because next year he probably will be a full-time starter.
Yes, and in the third round, they made another terrific move by selecting a guy who many people think could be the steal of the 2015 draft by selecting a linebacker from Texas Christian, Paul Dawson, 6 foot, 235. And for the past several years, an undrafted gem named Vontaze Burfict has been arguably the centerpiece of the Bengals defense, racking up tackles everywhere, just flying over the field, sideline to sideline, and the Bengals got him undrafted. He's arguably did one of the biggest draft steals in recent years, but sadly, Vontaze Burfict is coming off dreaded microfracture surgery, and very few people return to prior form after microfracture surgery. And just to add to the cherry on top of that, his status for week 1 is uncertain. And Paul Dawson received a lot of similar comparisons to Burfict due to his ability to read plays and diagnose them before the ball is snapped. So my question is, do you think Paul Dawson sees the field a lot this year? And do you think he'll be called on to replace Vontaze Burfict sooner rather than later if Burfict is unable to make that, unable to regain prior form, as most people expect?
Yeah. Burfict, it's so up in the air right now. There are some reports that he could be ready by July, and then there are some reports that he could be placed on the PUP list to start the season. So his status is very much in question for this year. And even after he comes back, the major question then is, will he ever be the player that he once was? But when it comes to Dawson, there's a lot more than just a comparison on the field. There's a bit of a comparison off the field as well. Both of those players have had some maturity problems, some off-field issues. That is probably why Dawson slipped the way he did. Always some question marks regarding character with both of those guys. But the Bengals didn't shy away from bringing in Burfict, and it really worked out for them. So drafting Dawson, I think they feel pretty comfortable, despite some character issues and some maturity issues. But do I think he sees the field a lot as a rookie? I don't really think so, because I think that more than likely A.J. Hawk and Vincent Ray are going to get most of those touches. I apologize. Sorry about that. All right. I think that most of the touches are going to go to A.J. Hawk and Vincent Ray this year, because Dawson's maturity is definitely a question mark. Once he proves that he is mature enough to handle that role and his character issues are not a problem, I definitely think he could emerge as a starter. I think he probably will take over for Burfict, because Burfict's status, again, is very much in question. It's very unlikely that he'll ever be the player that he once was after undergoing that surgery. So by 2016, I think Dawson's going to be a regular in the lineup. I think this season he's probably going to be really sharing some snaps with A.J. Hawk and Vincent Ray.
Yeah, they did bring in A.J. Hawk, but A.J. Hawk, I think, is a stopgap measure. So for Dawson to get his maturity issues under control. And if there's anybody who's been successful with developing guys with maturity problems, it has been Ozzie Newsome and Marvin Lewis, hands down. Those two guys just know how to work with players with certain character traits and make them into mature young men. And then moving to the Bengals' offensive side of the ball, it's a stunning supporting cast of weapons. Like I said, the Ravens are a deep team. You might as well call the Bengals the junior Ravens, because they're built very similarly. Stout up front, a lot of intriguing weapons on offense, but we'll get to. And if you look at, yes, you can look at Andy Dalton's stat line last year, but keep in mind this was a depleted core last year. A.J. Green wasn't 100% since with that turf toe injury last year, and Marvin Jones missed all last year. And Marvin Jones, don't forget, scored 10 touchdowns in 2013 and is a very underrated player. And Tyler Eifert missed all but 8 snaps last year, and they're definitely going to be counting on him to justify that first round pick they made on him in 2013, especially with Jermaine Gresham no longer a Bengal. But look at this offense. You got A.J. Green and Marvin Jones, two guys who could be a very studly receiving tandem if given more time to develop together. Tyler Eifert, who I still believe could be an amazing tight end in this league, and you got one of the best 1-2 backfield punches in the National Football League, and Jeremy Hill, who came on, who was a stud his rookie season, and arguably was the second best offensive rookie of the year option to only Odell Beckham Jr., his college teammate at LSU, and obviously Gio Bernard rounding out that 1-2 punch. But sadly, the guy that keeps holding the offense and this team back is Andy Dalton. If the Bengals had Joe Flacco, they'd be a Super Bowl team, and I'm not kidding. But Andy Dalton just constantly just can't seem to make that next leap as a player. Like losing all 4 of his playoff games so far in his career, and him getting booed at the baseball All-Star Game festivities in Cincinnati just underscores, just symbolizes how much he's held such a promising young roster back. In my opinion, with all these guys healthy this year, he's out of excuses. If Andy Dalton cannot get over that hump this year, do you think the Bengals will be looking to draft another quarterback early in 2016?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't let all those other talented guys go to waste. Joe Flacco gets criticized all the time because he doesn't win a lot of regular season games and his stats aren't flashy. But come playoff time, the guy turns it up a notch and he wins games. The opposite is true with Andy Dalton. He's made it to the playoffs 4 times and he's bombed. It's unacceptable. Cincinnati cannot continue to let him waste the talent that he has on his offense. The red rifle, he's not putting it together. Yeah, he might get them there, but to get them over that hump, I think they need a guy that can win in big games. And he is not big game Andy Dalton. He's just not cut out for it. And I think if he can't do it this year with everyone healthy around him, then yeah, he's lost his lead of everything. I mean, truly, you could put nearly any quarterback in the league behind that offense, and they should be able to maneuver them into the playoffs and up to the Super Bowl. With all that talent, it's crazy how much talent they have on offense. Yeah, Dalton's definitely out of excuses this year. I think the Bengals would definitely look to replace him next year if he can't put it together. I mean, there's always a chance that everything could just click for him and all of a sudden the Bengals are Super Bowl champions, but I just don't see that happening. I don't see him suddenly being able to overcome this hang-up that he has in big games.
I don't either, and that's why the Bengals scouting department is probably going to be at work early on guys like Jared Goff, Christian Hackenberg, Cardale Jones, those guys who could potentially be first-round quarterbacks in 2016. And let's go back to the defensive side of the ball. Due to injuries last season, the defensive side of the ball was played big time last year. They had a league worst 20 sacks, and one of the big reasons why was Geno Atkins, their all-pro, 3-technique defensive tackle, struggled to fully recover from that ACL surgery. But from what I hear now out of Bengals OTAs is that they think that he's fully recovered and has gotten that sap and explosion back, and that is going to be huge for the Bengals to get back to their dominant ways on defense. But thing that they got criticized for their otherwise solid draft class was that they didn't draft another pass rusher. Keep in mind, they only had 20 sacks last year. And yes, that is a testament of their confidence in Geno Atkins to return to the player he was before tearing his ACL. But you still need more guys than just Geno Atkins to get after the quarterback. Who do you think the Bengals are going to be counting on to rush the passer aside from a fully healthy Geno Atkins this year?
Well, last year, Carlos Dunlap accounted for 8 of the 20 sacks. So I definitely think Dunlap is going to be called upon again to put up big numbers this year. And I think having a fully healthy Geno Atkins is going to let him reach probably double digits. I mean, with Atkins being not 100%, Dunlap didn't really have as many opportunities, I would say. So I think the two of them together could both net double-digit sacks and already put the Bengals over the 20 mark that they hit last year. Going back in their history, though, the 20 sacks is just an anomaly. I think they've averaged 46 sacks or something around that number over the past few years. So to hit the 20 sack mark, I'm sure that even they were scratching their heads going, how in God's name did this happen? They probably thought that they misread that stat when they got to draft day, and that's why they didn't get a pass rusher, because they're going, no way we only had 20. That had to only be in like the first 7 games. But all jokes aside, I think that they are probably counting on Michael Johnson to have a big impact. He went to Tampa Bay, was there for a year. Tampa Bay had a big veteran purge. He ended up back in Cincinnati. He's very familiar with that team, very familiar with the defense, and he had 11.5 sacks in 2012. So if you compare up Michael Johnson, Carlos Dunlap, Geno Atkins, and each of those guys can have anywhere from 10 to 12 sacks, I think the Bengals are right back on track with what they're looking for in terms of a pass rush.
Yes, especially if Geno Atkins is fully recovered, as they say he is, then they should definitely surpass that 40 sack threshold again. And Marvin Lewis, he is the second longest tenured head coach behind only Bill Belichick currently in the National Football League, and they extended his contract. And despite all the talent the Bengals have assembled under his watch, and him having him arguably being their de facto general manager as well, if they don't take this next step next year, do you think he is on the hot seat? Because, like I said, I personally think it's unfair to blame this on Marvin Lewis. He is one of the best minds at assembling talent in football and is one of the best game planners there is. It's not his fault. Like I said, he's essentially Ozzie Newsome Jr., and that's not a swipe at Ozzie. That's a testament to Ozzie, like his offspring. So, so do you think Marvin Lewis goes on the hot seat after this year? And if he does go on the hot seat, do you think that's wise or unwise to put him on the hot seat?
Going back in my mental archive, I feel like we talked about this last year too. There is so much pressure on Marvin Lewis, and it's really just unfair. I think the biggest culprit for why the Bengals haven't been successful is Andy Dalton. And it's very hard when you've drafted a guy and you expect to groom him into a franchise quarterback to just yank him out of that spot and try to rely on a rookie or some kind of Band-Aid veteran to get you over the hump. Marvin Lewis was with the Ravens for all the years that they were struggling with the quarterback carousel, and I know for a fact that he doesn't want to end up like the Browns, where every year you just don't know who's going to be under center. I think that's why he has given Andy Dalton such a long leash. The results have not been terrible, but they also haven't been outstanding. I do, though, think it's really unfair to put Marvin Lewis on the hot seat. I think it's really Andy Dalton who's on the hot seat, and I think if it doesn't come together this year, it's going to be Andy Dalton who's out of Cincinnati, not Marvin Lewis. The Bengals are very lucky to have consistency at the head coaching position. It's something that the poorer teams in the league they struggle with year in and year out. Every year they're hiring a new GM, a new head coach, and it just doesn't usually work out for them because the teams that are really doing well, like the Patriots, like the Bengals, like the Ravens, they've had the same guy in that position for years, and the teams can trust them. The Steelers even, Mike Tomlin has been there for a long time. He just got an extension. That kind of consistency is what breeds success. So I think that it would be really sinful for the Bengals to pin this on Marvin Lewis. But you know what? If they do cut him loose, some other team is going to be very lucky. They're going to bring him in immediately as a head coach, and some other team would finally solve their head coaching woes if something like that were to happen.
Absolutely. Like, keep Marvin there until he can't do it no more, Bengals organization. I think you're behooved to do it. And his record speaks for itself, and his history and his pedigree speaks for itself. We're on the same point there. And now what we are down to our final 25 minutes, so we have to pick it up a notch here. Final Bengals question, though. Like I said, Jeremy Hill turned into a stud last year, and I think he is a stud. He is like one of the best all-purpose backs in the NFL. Not just that he could run, catch the ball in the backfield, pass protect. He could break off explosive runs of 20-plus yards, and he could get the tough yards on third and short when you're trying to wind down the clock. I think Jeremy Hill this year could join Le'Veon Bell at the top of the mountain of current NFL running backs this year. But I do hear that they do plan on giving Gio Bernard more touches out of the backfield this year. So the question is, do you think they keep Jeremy Hill in a workhorse role like I think they should, or do you think that they involve Gio Bernard more and it moves to more of a 50-50 split?
I think that it's going to be really tough to keep Bernard in a 50-50 split with Hill, considering that Hill led the NFL in yards for the last 9 seasons, or last 9 weeks of last season. I think he's going to easily overtake that role. it's got to be almost a nightmare for the Bengals to have such talented running backs, because you can't possibly use them both at one time. So it's almost a headache for them to have such great guys, because you want to get them both involved and you want to get them both touches, but there's just not enough touches to go around. So I think what will end up happening is it's going to be more 75-25 by the end of the season. The Bengals are really trying to commit to Gio Bernard getting a 50-50 split. I don't see it happening. Bernard's going to make the most of the opportunities he has. He's probably going to be a better receiver out of the backfield, but Hill's going to get the touches where it counts at the goal line. He's going to be pounding the rock for the most part. So yeah, I think eventually, even if they try to commit to it the first couple weeks of the season, Hill's going to easily overtake Bernard and get the majority of the carries.
I agree, and like many analysts have said, the best role for Gio Bernard is like a Shane Vereen role, or a Darren Sproles, Shane Vereen type role, a third down back who can catch the ball out of the backfield and make things happen in space. That's, I believe, Gio Bernard's forte, and that's those are the packages that he'll be primarily used, while Jeremy Hill does the rest. And now moving on to a team who surprised many last year with their great play. Solid play. Yes, they faltered down the stretch, but the fact that they got 7 wins out of a roster with barely any receiving core and a revolving door quarterback is a testament to how talented this Cleveland Browns team is and can be, in my opinion. And now let's put up their draft class on the screen. And for the second year in a row, they had 2 first-round draft picks for the second season in a row, and last year they obviously appear to have flopped with Johnny Manziel and Justin Gilbert, but I thought this year was very solid with them beeping up in the trenches. And with the first pick, with their first of their 2 first-round picks at 12 overall, they picked Danny Shelton, a defensive tackle out of Washington, who many scouts compared to somebody named Haloti Ngata. And last year, the Cleveland Browns had the worst-ranked run defense in the National Football League, and that was and that was the unit that held back an otherwise solid defense, in my opinion. And but how does the addition of Danny Shelton impact their ability to defend the run, and how big of an improvement do you expect the Browns to make statistically in defending the run?
Well, Danny Shelton is definitely viewed as a run stuffer. I don't think you're going to see him having a huge impact in the passing game. I don't think he's going to be rushing quarterbacks or anything like that, but I do think he's going to help solidify a defensive line that really leaked last year. When you put a big guy in there like that can eat up double teams, it instantly improves the guys around you, because then they can focus on really singling out the running back and just blocking him out. And I think that's what he's primarily going to do. He might not put up big stats. You might not see him with a ton of tackles, but he's going to be like the Haloti Ngata, Vince Wilfork, taking on double teams, just using his size and strength to keep the line together, and allowing other guys to go after not only the running backs but also the quarterback. But again, I don't see him putting up eye-popping numbers in terms of tackles or sacks or anything like that, where his impact would be felt is just more in the stats of the other guys around him. But he does have some stamina issues, and that's one thing that I think is going to hold him back a little bit. If he develops the way that the Browns are hoping, he could definitely shore up that line, but he's going to have to improve upon his stamina. The pro game is a lot faster than the college game, and the season is a lot longer. So that's going to really hurt his prospects in his rookie year, as he tries to really get that under control. I don't know if it's a weight issue with him, but he tends to wear down. So what he's going to want to do is really work on that. Whatever it takes, he's got to really get himself in better shape so that he can last a full NFL season.
Yes, that's the exact issue that Mike Mayock, the acclaimed NFL Network draft guru, pointed to on draft night, that the biggest concern, at least with Mayock, was his weight and conditioning, and and you're exactly right about that. And just 7 picks later, at 19th overall, they picked arguably the most sought-after center prospect in the draft in Cameron Irving. even though they already have a center on their roster in Alex Mack, they expect Irving to play some guard this year. But keep this in mind. Alex Mack signed an offer sheet with the Jaguars, I believe it was last offseason, and the Browns matched it, meaning that Alex Mack has the right to opt out of that deal at the end of this year. Do you think the draft pick of Cameron Irving means that this is Alex Mack's final year in Cleveland, the Pro Bowl center, Alex Mack?
Well, I think that's something that the Browns have to be prepared for. It may or may not be, but they don't want to be caught in a position where they don't have a backup for Alex Mack. So I think that Cameron Irving has said, I'm an offensive lineman. He wants to be known for his versatility. He believes that he can play any position along the line. He knows that he can play center, and I think the Browns are confident in that. I think so. It seems like they are preparing for Alex Mack to leave after this year. They want to go ahead and get Irving some reps, get him some time along the offensive line, and see exactly what he can do. And then he'll more than likely be making that switch next season to the center position.
I see that as well. And keep in mind, Cameron Irving came to Florida State as a defensive tackle and then switched to left tackle. And then midway through last season, switched to center. So that guy is Mr. Versatility. But looking at this Browns offensive line, man, like I mentioned, the Ravens being the second best only to the Cowboys, I would argue that the Browns are the third best offensive line in football. You got Joe Thomas at left tackle, future Hall of Famer, still playing at a very high level. You obviously still got Alex Mack for at least this year, a Pro Bowl center. Joe Bitonio came on as a stellar rookie guard. Yes, Zach Martin got all the attention, but Bitonio was a monster, a mauler last season at guard. Mm-hmm. And you obviously add Cameron Irving to that. Do you think this is a top three or top two or three offensive line in the National Football League? And do you think it can stay that way with Cameron Irving taking over for Alex Mack as you expect?
Well, I think they're definitely top five. Like you mentioned, Joe Thomas, he is the veteran stalwart. He's been there. He's put together a Hall of Fame career. This year, Alex Mack is still there. He's also a veteran presence. But you do have a couple of younger guys. And even though last year Joel Bitonio had a great season, there could be hiccups along the way. I don't know that that'll actually happen, but you just have to prepare for that. It's his sophomore season. A lot of guys have a little bit of a sophomore slump in the NFL. And Cameron Irving, he's definitely going to make an impact this year, but it's kind of, like you said, he's very versatile, but will he actually translate to an NFL center? He did it briefly in college, but could he put it all together next year in the pros? I think that they are definitely a top five unit. I think that they have the potential to still be a top five unit even without Alex Mack next year. But then again, we don't know who would then replace Irving at that other guard position. So there's going to be a little bit of fluctuation next year, but I think this year they could easily be top three, but most certainly top five.
Yeah, and continuing with the Browns draft class for a moment. In the third round, they drafted one of the most decorated pass rushers out of the Pac-12 in Nate Orchard out of Utah. Orchard had 18.5 sacks last year. And one of the things that made the Browns defense take quite a significant step forward last year was the emergence of pass rush. Paul Kruger justified the contract they gave him in 2013 by notching 11 sacks last year, but his running mate Barkevious Mingo has not lived up to that six overall draft choice status in 2013. And so my question is, do you think Orchard can replace Mingo in the starting lineup at some point this season if Mingo continues to fail to live up to that billing?
Oh, yeah, definitely. If Mingo doesn't put it together, the Browns are not going to keep letting him try to figure it out. They've got, like you said, Nate Orchard, a guy that we know can rush the passer. That is going to be – they're trying to play in that AFC North mold, where they want to pound the ball on the ground and stop the run. So that for them, having a solid core in their defense is really important. Mingo has not lived up to that billing yet, but Nate Orchard is a guy who can do it all, and he's going to give them the pass rush that they need. And so I think that he could easily overtake Mingo, maybe not even all that late into the season if Mingo continues to struggle. first round picks only get so much leeway, and I think Mingo is going to be out of it pretty soon. If I'm not mistaken, he was drafted by a previous regime, and so the guys that are there in control now might not hold him in as high favor as the guys that were there before.
Most definitely. And Orchard, if you look at his college tape, he absolutely schooled Andrus Peat, who was the 13th overall pick by the Saints in their game against Stanford. And Orchard also shied at the Senior Bowl, and why he wasn't. He was drafted in round 2, but he, I think, had an argument to be drafted in the first round, but the pass rushing class was so deep, but that's another debate to have. But Orchard, I think, could be one of the best value picks of the Browns draft. And you betcha the Browns like to run the ball, and they're going to live off of the running games. But not only because of their situation at quarterback, their situation at wide receiver. Josh Gordon suspended for the whole year. Jordan Cameron led free agency to Miami. Their receiving core is essentially a group of also-rans. Dwayne Bowe, Brian Hartline. Not going to scare anybody. Andrew Hawkins is an underrated player, but he's a slot receiver, and I don't think the Browns plan to use that many 3-wide sets. And Rob Hausler, an unproven tight end, a journeyman. So it's going to be ground and pound all day in Cleveland. And they have 3 pretty talented young running backs, and Isaiah Crowell, who who exploded in his rookie season, and Terrence West, who they're counting on to make an even bigger explosion in his second season. And they also drafted Duke Johnson out of Miami to be like a third down, a Sproles type back. So my question is, how do you think they divide up those touches in that backfield this season?
Well, I think Crowell is going to be the lead back. I think West is going to spell him pretty often. I think they are going to have more of a 50-50 split, like what the Bengals say they want to do with Hill and Bernard. I think that'll be more of the scenario in Cleveland. So we'll see what happens with Duke Johnson. He could get some goal line touches. I don't see him really being able to overtake either of those guys for a starting role. So I do think it'll shake out sort of the way it was last year with Crowell, then West, and then Johnson. I think all 3 of them will see time on the field because, honestly, the Browns don't have any other weapons on offense, so they're going to really utilize their 3-headed monster in the backfield. That's, for me, the biggest question mark on what the Browns were doing or what were they thinking this offseason. How could they not have gone after a round 1 receiver? They had 2 first-round picks. But they left that position totally devoid of talent and instead stocked up on running backs. So that will probably come back to bite them, but I do think that they have 3 very talented rushers who they'll try to mix up as much as they can to keep defenses off balance. Because like you said, 3 wide receiver sets just aren't going to happen in Cleveland this year.
Mm-hmm. And also the Browns probably ignored the wide receiver position. Yes, I think it was a mistake, but I could understand their rationale for that because they do not have a capable quarterback of getting them the ball. And their choice this year heading into training camp is either Josh McCown, a mostly failed journeyman despite a flash of brilliance under Mark Trestman with the Bears, as we alluded to earlier, or Johnny Manziel, who I personally think wasn't meant to be a quarterback in the National Football League. And to Manziel's credit, yes, he did check into rehab this year to get his behavior and lifestyle under control, and I give him credit for that. But I still don't think he'll be successful in the NFL. But McCown was exposed without Trestman last year in Tampa as what he really is, a below-average quarterback. And between him and Johnny Manziel, they say McCown is the front runner for the job, the clear front runner for the starting quarterback job headed into camp. But my question is, it's a 2-part question about quarterbacks. The first part is, if McCown sneaks it up right out of the get-go, do you think the Browns are going to be pressured to start Manziel like early in the season?
Oh, God, yeah. The Browns fans will be booing if there's one incompletion in week 1 by McCown. You don't draft a somewhat maybe kind of quarterback in the first round and then not play him. So I think the Browns really kind of screwed themselves over. I mean, if we're being totally honest, I think anyone that was looking at that situation could see that Manziel wasn't really going to translate from the college game to the pros, but the Browns took that risk anyway. And so now their fans have this inflated expectation that this guy's going to be a savior. And so McCown is not going to get much of a chance, if any, to prove himself. One or two minor slips, and the city of Cleveland is going to come bearing down on that team, screaming for Johnny Football. They probably believe that this, like you said, checking into rehab is a sign of maturity. Maybe he's growing up. Maybe he's put that party boy behind him. Maybe he's really ready to take the next step and be an NFL quarterback. But reality check, Cleveland, you're still on the quarterback carousel. There is no franchise quarterback in Cleveland. There is not even a decent quarterback in Cleveland. And I hate to be mean about it because as a Ravens fan, I lived it for years. We had Kyle Bowler, he was supposed to be all great and wonderful. So I know the feeling. I totally empathize with the Browns fans. It's an awful conundrum to be in because your team starts and ends with how successful your quarterback is, and they are just not going to find success with the two guys that they have, unfortunately.
Yes, and one final question about the Browns before we conclude our program here. They also have two other quarterbacks on the roster, in Thaddeus Lewis, who was a backup to E.J. Manuel for the Buffalo Bills in 2013, and I believe he was there last year as well, and Connor Shaw, who was an undrafted free agent out of South Carolina last year, who actually started the season finale against the Ravens and played pretty admirably given the circumstances and the quality of the defense he was facing. So my question is, do you think there is any chance that one of those two guys can beat out Johnny Manziel for that backup quarterback spot, assuming McCown holds on to the starting job?
Well, I think Connor Shaw is probably the best quarterback on Cleveland's roster. I think he's the most talented and probably the most pro-style quarterback. But I think that, again, the Browns are handcuffed to the first-round pick label that Manziel has. I don't think that they're going to be able to supplant him in any position, whether it's as a starter or as a backup. I don't think anybody's going to ever overtake his position. What'll probably end up happening is they'll keep riding that carousel for a couple more years and then get another first-round pick when they can, and they'll draft another quarterback then.
Or that could be as early as next year, given the amount of quarterbacks that are expected to come into the draft. And I guarantee you that in week one, you'll probably see, especially with Cleveland being in Ohio and the same state as Ohio State, you might see those fail for Cardale signs going up all over the First Energy Field in Cleveland from the get-go. So that campaign might be in full swing from week one. And that pretty much concludes our program. But as we do at the end of all these programs, we make predictions. And by the way, like I said, the Steelers and the Vikings reported to training camp today. So we're already at training camp, folks. So it's time to start making these predictions more than ever. So what I want to hear is your predictions for each team's final record from first to last place in 2015 in the AFC North. Hit it.
All right. Ravens 11-5. Steelers 10-6. I'm going to say the Bengals are going to finish 10-6 as well, and the Browns are going to put together another 6-10 season.
I have a hard time disagreeing with that, but the hard part is, aside like the specific records, especially given the AFC North going against the NFC West, and yes, like I mentioned, the 49ers have taken a huge step backwards, but the Rams and Cardinals are obviously no slouch, and obviously the Seahawks are still a top two roster in football, in my opinion. So it's hard to determine how many wins they're going to get, but those matchups are going to be super interesting this year. But I do agree. I think the Ravens are the most balanced team in the division, and they get the best record because and Joe Flacco is the reason why. And I have a better roster than but Andy Dalton, Ben Roethlisberger just supersedes Andy Dalton, But it's hard to disagree with the general order of that. I completely agree. And we do have 5 minutes left. What are some surprise players within this division do you think we should keep an eye out on this year, especially from a fantasy football perspective?
Ooh, surprise players. I got to go with Crockett Gilmore. That's really going to be a surprise for people because most folks have never heard of him. But the Ravens are going to be without Dennis Pitta for at least the first 6 weeks of the season. You know that Joe Flacco loves his tight ends. I think that Max Williams is going to have a little bit of a learning curve as a rookie, so he might not immediately make the kind of impact that we'd like for him to make. And Crockett Gilmore has the familiarity with the Ravens offense and Joe Flacco, so I think he's going to get a lot more receptions this year than he did last year. There's really no one that's all that surprising if you're looking at a fantasy perspective. Even Joe Flacco might be surprising this year if you really want to get to it, because for the most part he goes undrafted in fantasy leagues. He does not usually put up the kind of stats that people are thinking are elite, and the debate rages on year after year. But with the quarterback whisperer, calling the plays for him, and the fact that they probably will pass a little bit more this year under Trestman with the system that he brings to town, and of course the plethora of weapons that Flacco is working with, he's probably going to eclipse the 4,000-yard mark for the first time in his career, and he could put up quite a bit of touchdowns too. I'm trying to think of guys that are going to surprise us. Martavis Bryant from the Steelers, definitely a guy to keep an eye on. He's one that, like we said, put up 8 touchdowns. This year, I would imagine he could possibly get into the double digits in touchdowns. He's definitely going to get more catches, being the number 2 receiver. Even though Wheaton is a guy that we all thought was going to break out last year, he kind of failed us in that regard. So I think Bryant is easily going to do that. In Cleveland, you might look at Dwayne Bowe as a late round if you don't really have anybody else to pick, kind of wide receiver. Because he'll probably be the number 1 guy in Cleveland. Everybody's got to have a security blanket, and Bo will probably be the security blanket for whatever quarterback ends up under center out there. And then in Cincinnati, no one's going to catch you off guard there. They're all so explosive on offense that any one of those guys, with the exception of Andy Dalton, could be drafted in fantasy leagues and make a big impact.
Yeah, a guy I'm excited about in that offense is Tyler Eifert. I think this is the year he justifies that first-round selection they made in 2013.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that, definitely.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ashley. And that does it for today on Sports Crunch with Dkrom. We once again thank Ashley Anderson for donating her time and her beautiful knowledge of football. And before we depart, Ashley, I want to give you the opportunity to share with our viewers and listeners where they can find your work online.
Well, you can find me on Twitter. It's Ashley_L87. As David mentioned, we both write for FirstStopFantasy.com. So you can go there to find most of my work. And Facebook, if you want to find me there too, it should be kind of linked to my Twitter account. And I'm also a member of the First Stop Fantasy group there, so you can find me there. But yeah, definitely. You could even Instagram me if you want. It's all under the Ashley_L87. So.
Yeah. Thank you very much once again, Ashley. And it's always a pleasure to have you on the program. And that does it for today here on Sports Crunch with Dkrom. And we will be back here tomorrow to interview Eric Trickle, a Denver Broncos insider from the website milehighhuddle.com, as we will preview their training camp, which opens on Friday. So thanks again for watching, folks, and hope to see you next time here on Sports Crunch with Dkrom. Take care, everybody.